Hope you guys are doing well. I know it's a little weird being at home. Hopefully, we're back to school tomorrow. That'd be awesome. I miss you guys already. But for the time being, you'll see these recorded lessons, and I'm going to have these posted for you guys to look at. Obviously, you can replay them to make sure you have the information. But I wanted to put them out there for you now. So you can email me with any questions that you might have, or if you want to email me and we can set up a Zoom chat to talk about the lesson, that'd be great too, whatever you guys want to do. But I wanted to post this up for you now so you have it and you can look over it and obviously be prepared for the lesson for tomorrow. So here's the bell ringer for today. So describe the benefits the Gilded Age brought to American society. So I'll give you a few minutes if you want to pause the video so you can write down your response. That would be great. If not, obviously I'll go over it. But pause the video now so you can write your response down and then I'll discuss it. So I'll give you a few seconds to do that. All right, so describe the benefits the Gilded Age brought to American society. The key benefits is what we already discussed and went over with the industrial age, how many of these people from European countries, let's say, that had these new innovations already from this industrial revolution that occurred in the mid 1800s, early 1800s, they're bringing these key innovative ideas to the United States. And I know I harped on it a lot. I mentioned it quite a bit already, but I want to make sure that we note and talked about the Gilded Age and these industrial giants before we move on more with the progressive era. And that's what we're going to discuss with the lesson today with these muckrakers and key progressives. So key benefits is that the United States is going through a transition. The United States is becoming a more developed country. We see more modern techniques, more modern ideals. With industrialization, we see the creation of factories, businesses, where people have the opportunity to make a wage and obviously spend that money in the economy. So our economy is transitioning from an agricultural society to an industrial society, a more modern society, what we know of today even. Again, these key innovations, these industrial giants, they brought a lot of good, right? We see a more modern United States, essentially a world power when we get to it, when we talk about it, in the upcoming chapters with World War One. But at the same time, right, we're going to talk about some of the issues that were brought forth from these key industrial giants. And a lot of that was due to many mistreatments in the workplace and no guidelines, no safety procedures, you name it. All right, so I want to make sure you guys obviously had that. Right, I want to make sure you guys, obviously know the benefits to the Gilded Age. Again, without these key industrial giants, these titans, we wouldn't be the country, the world power, the only superpower in the world without this transition, right? Without this advancement. Okay, so moving on here today, to make sure you guys have this. I will put up the vocab tomorrow. Hopefully we're in school, so I will definitely have that vocab for you tomorrow so that you have that. You can write that down, obviously. I just didn't, I wanted to keep the video short today. I understand there's a lot going on and you have a lot of classes to deal with. So I wanted to make sure that I could keep this short. So real quick, let me go through the lesson and I'll have the assignment ready for you guys. Obviously we'll work on that, have that finish up for tomorrow. So we already talked about the problems of the progressive era, the three main factors: industrialization, urbanization, and immigration. And we discussed how these key factors brought about a lot of change in the United States. And again, we mentioned the benefits. We mentioned how the United States has become more of a modern society, a world power. But through this Gilded Age, through this innovation, through this transition for betterment, for modernization, come a lot of key problems, right? And from these problems, we see a lot of social and political issues. Okay, many of these industrial giants, they're paying off many politicians and public figures so that their businesses, their profits won't be interrupted. And many political cartoons that you see, these big politicians, these huge industrial giants are viewed as fat, overweight, okay, massive individuals that are collecting, hoarding in all the money for themselves, right? They are trying to obviously soak up all the wealth. And that's why there was no middle class at this time. It was just the wealthy individuals, very small percentage of people. And then you had the working class that worked constantly, right? Day in and day out, 17-hour days, no days off, no vacation days, no sick days. They didn't have benefits. They had no insurance. So if they couldn't make work, well, they're probably fired. And these individuals needed this pay. It was so low that they really couldn't afford to put food on the table. That's why they needed to continue to work constantly to make sure they could provide for their family. And through this time, we see a lot of families growing their family out. I know what you're thinking. Well, if they can't afford food to put on the table, why are they having more kids, more babies, you name it? Well, the more kids you have, the more money you're bringing to the table, right? The more kids you have, the more wages that your household is earning, right? And we'll talk about some of these child labor laws that are being enacted around the progressive era. But children going to work in these unsafe conditions, in these brutal conditions, no protection, very little pay, and how that was very hard for the family. But families needed the kids, bring in more money to afford a better lifestyle. All right, so the rich got richer. Like I mentioned, here's Andrew Carnegie. We already mentioned him quite a bit, right? And the poor got poorer. Okay, this is a time period in American history where the wealth, the economic status, the division amongst social classes, economic classes are totally distant, right? You had a few percent of people, which we mentioned four key innovators, industrial giants. They're a little bit more, but for the most part, very small amount of people. And again, they work the politics, they work the country. Like they are the ones making the decisions because these public officials, well, they're getting an extra wage from these individuals to make sure that their business wouldn't get interrupted, right? That politics were skewed for their betterment, for their advancement. And again, we needed this progressive movement for the individuals in our society so that we wouldn't really go to an extent where these wealthy industrial giants controlled everything. And that's where the nickname robber baron comes into play. Taken from the poor, right? They're just looking for the most advancement for themselves. And like I mentioned, children going to work. I already talked about that quite a bit. Okay, same thing, trying to provide for the family as much as possible. So what do these progressives do? Make sure you guys remember this. Number one, progressives wanted to reform or change. Okay, they wanted to make sure that they could see an opportunity and advance for the betterment of their society. Two, progressives wanted the government to take control. These public officials just can't be in the pockets of these industrial giants, right? These public officials, these politicians, they need to fight for the people that are voting them into office, try to fight for the betterment of society as a whole, that people got better wages, that people didn't have to work constantly day in and day out in the industries and the factories, that everybody had an equal opportunity. Three, progressives wanted social justice. All right, real quick, social justice means equal rights and fairness. Again, everybody wanted a similar opportunity. We didn't want to see politics. We didn't want to see economic gains. We didn't want to see lifestyle skewed to specific people like these industrial giants. These people also needed an opportunity for themselves and for their advancement. All right, so four, progressives were middle class, right? This middle class working group, okay, most of these people were uneducated. They didn't have a right to an education. So it was really hard for these people to actually portray themselves and try to project their opportunities, their freedoms, their rights. Okay, it was really difficult for these movements to establish themselves in the mid to late 1800s. It took quite a bit of time. It took a lot of people that were journalists, reporters, okay? These people that obviously had the ability to display the grievances and the issues with society to the rest of the people in society and to these industrial giants and these public officials. Five, progressives hated big business. We already know with monopolies, we talked about that quite a bit. These monopolies, these bigger businesses buying up these smaller businesses, taking away their opportunity, taking away their way of life. Okay, you didn't really have these people, these small business owners taking risks because, well, these bigger monopolies, these bigger businesses were buying up the competition. They could offer prices lower than that, let's say, of a smaller business. Okay. And they could obviously try to run these businesses um, really to their end, right? To the point where they didn't have the ability to continue on. So these monopolies, these larger corporations really were competitive with these smaller industries, making sure that there were no competitions. All right. If there was no competitors, if there was no competition, then they could set eventually, when there is no competition, the wages that the prices to whatever they would want. They can pay the workers lower than dirt because there's nowhere else for these workers to go. They can set the prices at extremely high measures where people can't afford them. Okay, but if they can, they're making a bigger buck, right? All right, so a muckraker, these are the people, the journalists, the writers that were writing about the scandals of the rich, right? They're talking about the poor business attitudes, the poor business ethics of these industrial giants, and they're bringing the light, right? They're writing about these issues, they're drawing pictures or creating illustrations of the corrupt society in the United States, the corruption of these key industry, these industrial giants, these key business leaders, and presenting it to the people so that they can conform to society, so that they can obviously present this to public officials for change. All right, so real quick, two key and progressive muckrakers. We have Jacob Riis, photographer, New York Evening Sun, and his famous work, How the Other Half Lives. So he took pictures, as you can see here, here's one example of the living conditions in these larger cities, let's say like New York City. How people were jam-packed in the small rooms because that's the only thing that they could afford. Many people didn't have electric. Many people didn't have running water. They didn't have plumbing. So literally living on top of each other. Sickness, disease spreading amongst these populations as urbanization was becoming stronger and bigger in these cities where the jobs were located. And it really was a terrible time for people to live through these issues, okay, and through these times. Again, I can't even imagine living in something like this portrayed in this picture. But Jacob Riis taking pictures, he wanted to show the public, show society of how people actually live. Okay, again, no insulation, no electricity, no heating. Can you imagine in the winter months, especially, let's say Philadelphia, these Northeast cities, New York City, Boston, without insulation, without heat, it'd be unbelievable, right? It'd be crazy. So Jacob Riis taking pictures, okay, his famous work, How the Other Half Lives. He wanted to make sure that people knew how these individuals actually lived in society. Right, Upton Sinclair, I mentioned him before, The Jungle. So he wrote about the horrible conditions in the meatpacking industry. So how people, in these meat industries, they didn't really go by any health regulations, any type of safety codes. Like I mentioned, this meat that was hung up in these meat lockers, they would spoil after some time. Now, what does that meat bring in? Draw in rats, rodents, and they would obviously burrow into this meat, laying, obviously, their feces inside this meat, and to a point where these individuals, they didn't care. They're going to chop up that meat. If there is a rat in it, if there is the rat's waste inside of that meat, they're going to package it and send it out to the restaurant, send it out to their grocery stores. Someone will eat it. There were no guidelines at that time. There was no FDA to approve of food and consumer protections. None of that was even around in the late mid 1800s. So it really was a terrible time for the consumer. Even if they could afford meat to put on the table, it was probably not well treated. It was disgusting. And with that being said, how to kill the rodents, how to kill the mice? Well, you throw poison down. Well, what happens to the mouse once it consumes that poison? It dies. And if it so happens to be in that meat, they grind it up, they package it, they send it out. So what are people eating? Rat poisoning and dying over it. It was very terrible time, and something needed to be done. And Upton Sinclair, in his book The Jungle, he wrote about these terrible things that were occurring in the meatpacking industries. All right, so that being said, real quick, that's all I have. So the famous muckrakers, Jacob Riis, Upton Sinclair. Okay, I'll have an activity for you tomorrow about some of these individuals, but you'll see this assignment. This is an excerpt from The Jungle. I'd like you guys to read over this. It's very interesting. It talks about these disgusting treatments, guidelines, no guidelines really, in the meat packing industry and how disgusting it was. And it's very disturbing to read. So I just want to make sure you guys obviously know that and complete these questions that are attached below. All right, that's all I have for today. Hope you guys are doing well. Hopefully we can get back to normal here soon. But we'll see you guys later. Take care. Have a good one.